Okay, as everyone heard, this is a recorded session, and so that's our nice cue to begin. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Samantha Newton. I am the artist coordinator at the Eastside Art Society, and I'm very pleased to be moderating this year's Talking Art. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are holding this event from the unceded, ancestral, and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. For those of us who experienced the first snow of the year here today, it's just one of many experiences that make us very thankful and grateful to be on these lands. So thank you. For those of you who are new, Talking Art is a three-part thematic artist talk series that the Eastside Art Society presents in advance of the annual Eastside Culture Crawl, this year happening on November 17th to the 20th. We invite you to visit the artists in their studios next Thursday through Sunday for the Culture Crawl, so be sure to check out their work at culturecrawl.ca/artists to find their studio locations. You can find all the information about the Culture Crawl and our other programming on our website at culturecrawl.ca. For the format of today's discussion, I will pose three main questions to each of the artists. I kindly ask the audience to please type any questions for the artists into the Q&A chat for the question period at the end of our discussion. Tonight's presentation, Talking Art, Inspiration Embodied, will explore the artist's work and relationship to creativity and its embodiment. I'm pleased to introduce the artists here with us today to explore this subject: Cat Pino, Shary Bartlett, and Annette Nieukerk. Did I get that right, Annette?
Nieukerk.
Nieukerk, thank you, I apologize. Cat Pino was born in Calama, Chile. At 8 years old, she immigrated with her family to Saskatchewan to escape the Pinochet regime. She completed her BFA at the University of Saskatchewan. Her experience growing up in an isolated Saskatchewan town manifested a severe eating disorder. Her amplified feelings of guilt, isolation, and loneliness provided the initial conduit for her creative expression. Her road to recovery inspires her current work with concepts of rebirth, resurrection, and transformation. Shary Bartlett is a Canadian artist living in Vancouver, Canada. Her mixed media paintings and sculptures are held in public and private collections internationally. She teaches art workshops globally and nationally and has been a long-time fine arts instructor at Capilano University, Langara College, and Red Deer College. Shary's encaustic mixed media work and techniques are published in the books Encaustic Art in the 21st Century and Encaustic Revelation. Her personally curated encaustic wax pigment sets, created with Encaustico paints, are sold internationally. Shary offers a variety of inspiring instructional videos online, and she is an instructor with the year-long Encaustic Masterclass Painting with Fire. Annette Nieukerk is in their 5th decade of their art practice, having had varied career spanning disciplines, media, and genre. Annette works out of a studio in East Vancouver, utilizing a variety of mixed painting and drawing media, employing the human figure as the focus of their practice. Formerly taught with a BFA in printmaking, a B.Ed in art education, and an MFA in theater design, Annette has made art their life's pursuit. Having always a passion for figurative work, they find that as they age, Annette no longer is content to portray youthful lives and bodies that have throughout history been the subject of figurative paintings. Annette's interest has shifted to portraying the aging body. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. The order for today's questions, we will start with Cat, then Shary, then Annette. And before we start our question period, to start the conversation and center our discussion of inspiration within the body and establish a common ground of understanding, I will begin by summarizing a neuroscience perspective of how creativity occurs within the human brain. Quoting humanistic psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman, he's my source. When a multitude of areas of the brain are activated to solve a specific task, it is called a brain network. Often mistaken for purely a left or right brain aptitude, creativity in fact draws on three particular brain networks: the salience network, the executive attention network, and the default mode network, also called the imagination network. The salience network tags things that are interesting or not interesting and feeds tagged information to the other networks. The executive attention network holds the information in your working memory, maintains strategies, and inhibits obvious responses. And the default mode network is responsible for daydreaming, future goals, and compassion, or seeing things from other perspectives. So that's our little nerd out moment. And for everyone to just understand a little bit about how some of our brains work. So our first question is, with this understanding of these brain networks, considering the influence or say byproducts of these three neurological networks in mind, in your current body of work, can you speak to different elements, choices, or modes of creation in your process of production? Or as you put it, Kat, the experiences of birthing our muse. And a secondary part to this question, which please let me know if you want me to repeat it. What is the result of that process or influence? And I'll let you take the floor, Kat. Thank you.
Thank you. So for the silence, for that triggers the brain to have attention to a specific moment. And I always get inspired by the story of how the window wiper was invented. So the guy was in a wedding. There was a flying cork hit him in the eye. He had an injury. And then he went driving when it was raining. So the attention was brought to the eye, the blinking of the eye. And then when he was trying to drive in the rain, it even brought more focus to the blinking of the eye. So the experience of the damage of the eye and driving the rain is what invented the window wiper like we have today. So for me, how I see that is my experience with the eating disorder and my journey to healing are two major experiences that influence my work. And how they influence my work is that the eating disorder brought attention to the body. So I was hyper-focused on how my physical body felt, feeling cold, the hunger pain, the pain in my throat, and also the healing journey, which was me diving into the psychological aspects of a disorder, finding the root, which led me to find false beliefs that were hidden in different layers that was influence my behavior unknowingly. So how I paint on the floor because it makes me, I feel connected to my body. And that's what I brought in. That's what I got from the eating disorder. I needed to physically feel my body when I'm working. So I can't paint on an easel because I feel separated. So I have to paint on the floor so I can feel the rhythm of my body moving while I'm painting. Like I can move around the painting and look at different angles. And the psychological part of it is the layering. I have to work in layers because to me, I'm mending parts of myself to find the wholeness. So the influence for me is in the behavior and how I make the work. And then for the executive attention network, so for that one is what drives a conceptual part of it. So it's like you're connecting the story with your paintings. For me, it works in reverse. Like some painters have the idea and they end up paint on the idea. I go backwards. Like I work with the image intuitively, and then the message comes through the work. So the painting's basically telling me what the message is because it's coming through subconsciously through my action. Can we bring that painting up, the transformation, for the first slide? And then for the default mode, this is where the part that I want to create in this area. So when you go in meditation, or if you're doing dishes and you forget, like you space out, you're doing dishes, so you forget what you're doing. I try to create work in that area. So I try to get into altered states by for example, listening to music that has a toning sound. So you kind of put yourself in that kind of meditative state. So, because I feel like I can create more authentic image, where I'm not forcing the image out, that I'm kind of getting it out through subconsciously or outside of me, if that makes sense. So this is one of those paintings that I've been working on, that came through just working intuitively, and not forcing in the image, because I wasn't even into landscapes. I wasn't even something I was interested in. Just kind of, I was just playing with image, and then the image came through, so I had to work with it because the painting was telling me that there was a message in it. I think I answered all your questions.
I believe you did. Yes, thank you. We do have a little bit of time left. Would you like me to ask a question, or do you want to save maybe for another question?
What was the second part again of that?
What is the result of the process or the influence?
Okay. So I think I touched base on that. So I can take that from the way I paint is the physical part of your body, and connecting to the muse, or some people call it, I call it spirit, some people call it muse, and it gets connected to the way I grew up. I grew up Catholic, not practicing, but I like how Catholics have the Trinity. I think it's like the spirit. I'm blanking out now, but there's like 3 divisions, and that's how I see a painting is like connecting the conscious mind, the spirit, and the soul. So like I see painting as a spiritual practice. So when I'm working, I'm trying to get the most authentic image, because it's almost like an act of prayer, but I do it through painting, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you for expanding on that. So we'll move over to our next speaker, Shary. I'll repeat the question for you because I know it is a little bit lengthy. So with the understanding of the 3 neuro or brain networks that work within creativity, considering the influence of these, or influence or byproducts, I guess it's however you perceive these in the mind. In your current body of work, can you speak to different elements, choices, or modes of creation in your process of production, as Cat puts it, experiences in birthing our muse?
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Samantha and Jody back there, and Eastside Art Society for having me. And this is a fascinating conversation. It's interesting listening to Cat and thinking, those are some things I was thinking about as well. So I thought that I would say that it just sort of explained that I'm a mixed media artist. I've used all kinds of media throughout my life, painting and fiber arts and photography. And I find that there's a lot of things that kind of pique that salience network that I get interested in, or I see an image and I think, wow, that would be really interesting to try to create something out of fabric or take a photograph or whatever. But over the years, I've gotten quite bored. I'll delve into something and then I'll get bored with it. But about 15 or 20 years ago, I discovered this art form called encaustic, which means to burn in. And it's a form of painting using molten beeswax. It's a really ancient form of painting that goes back to pre-Christian days. And working with beeswax is amazing because it's really luminous and it's beautiful, it's flexible, and you can use it with all kinds of media. So it turns out to be the perfect thing for me because I can dip fabric in it or put it on photographs or wood or whatever. So it's been a really rich material source for me. So I find that when I get that salience network kind of fired up and I get an idea, then I think, okay, so what are you going to do to make that happen? So I have to start thinking about and sort of engaging that executive attention network. So I have to think about, well, how can I make this work with wax or whatever it is I'm working with? So I start experimenting, and unfortunately, I make a lot of mistakes. So I have tons and tons of pieces that just pile up because I'm learning from them, and I'm trying to, as I get older and more experienced with art, I try to welcome the mistakes and see them as actually just as positive as things that work really well. But so I sort of work with both that technical side, and I get the idea, and then really start to use the imaginative side. So Jody, if you don't mind putting up the first image, that would be great. So this is a picture of how we work with encaustic wax, just to give you an idea. So it's used with a heated palette, and then brushes usually that we brush on, or sometimes we pour wax, or we can form sculptures, for example. So I find that once I get that sort of idea, then I have to apply it to wax and see what works and doesn't, and start to experiment. And I have found that, particularly because I love nature, that a lot of the work that I do ends up having a natural kind of theme to it. Jody, if you don't mind going to the next slide. I find that often what happens is that whatever work I'm doing, kind of like Cat was saying, the work that I have the idea, and then I experiment with the material of the wax, and then the art grows. And sometimes I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, what is that about? And so that kind of fires up the salience network again to think, okay, well, I better do some research and find out about this, which fires up that executive attention network. And so I find that all of those three brain networks really end up working together. And sometimes it's hard to sort of divide them up. They all sort of interweave together. Jody, if you could put the next slide up. This is an example of a painting made with beeswax and bones. And one day I was really struck by how beautiful bones are and how powerfully significant they are for us. They really bring up a lot of emotions. And I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to use that executive network, if you will, to think about how am I going to use those in wax? And I made a lot of mistakes as I was trying to attach them with the wax. And then that really kind of fired up that imagination network to see these bones as almost like marks, as text to write poetry. So I started making a series of paintings that were as if they were writing poetry. This is called asemic writing, when you are writing text, like it looks like a text, but it's actually you can't read it. So Jody, if you don't mind putting the next slide up, please. This painting, it's a photograph and a painting called Tangled Forest. And it's a photograph with wax on it. I mentioned that nature really sparks that salience network for me and gets my imagination network fired up. And I take a lot of photographs. And so what I have done as part of my practice is work with those photographs and distress them and destruct them and sand them and mark into them and kind of break them apart and turn them more into a painting in a way than a photograph. So I destruct the image and then I build it up again, and I bathe the photograph with encaustic and I carve into it. And I really try to preserve that, that kind of imagination space of what I felt like in nature. So kind of bringing that imagination network to express itself in the painting. And I wanted to show you one piece that is a sculpture. So Jody, if you don't mind putting that last one up. This is actually on display at the Fire Hall Theater now, which is part of the Culture Crawl's, I think, 5 exhibits as part of the next exhibition that's happening right now. And this sculpture is called Daedalus's Gift. And you might remember Daedalus was the father of Icarus from that Greek fictional tale of Icarus. And Daedalus made Icarus a set of wings from which to leave the labyrinth where they were imprisoned. And he warned Icarus not to fly too close to the sun. So for me, this story is really very much about parenting, and how it really spoke to me at the time my son was becoming a young man, and I realized I needed to let him go and trust that he would make good judgments on his own. And so this piece is kind of this combination again of those 3 networks: the salience network, the imagination network, and the executive network, trying to figure out how to take this fabric called Loutre-d'Or that I had printed with the poem by Ovid and holding it all together with wax, just like the wings. So that's kind of a brief overview of how I would apply those brain networks to my work.
Thank you for sharing, Shary. That's great. That's wonderful. And Annette, I'll just repeat the question for you as well. With this understanding, considering the influences or byproducts of these 3 neurological networks in the mind, in your current body of work, can you speak to different elements, choices, or modes of creation in your process of production, or as Cat puts it, experiences in birthing the muse? And secondary question is, what is the result of that process or influence? I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you for the invitation to be here. And a very quick thank you to the East Side Atelier artists, all 45 of them who are being very quiet right now so that we can do this interview. It's much appreciated. My response to these modes of creation is a very personal one, a very introspective one. And I find as I age, I go further and further inside for my inspiration to for my modes of creation. There's a couple of key pivotal moments where this happened for me. Jody, if you could bring up the first slide, please. Thank you. This is a slide, was a painting that I did of my mom. Mom was 96 years old, and she was close to the end. And as I sat by her bedside in Lethbridge, Alberta, I couldn't help but notice how beautiful her skin was, particularly on her hands. The skin of her hands was so thin, it was like fine parchment, and it was like I could see through to her bones, I could see through to her muscles, to the sinews of her hands. It was almost as if I could see through to her spirit, because her skin seemed to glow. She seemed to glow from within, and I was absolutely transfixed by how beautiful my mother looked at 96. And I thought, I have to do something with this. So I did this image of my mom at that particular time. I work on translucent drafting film in different layers so that I can get a different a look of one layer shining through to the other layer. Next image, please, Jody. So I wanted to start working with older women. I find that our society has a real hang up, taboo almost, in depicting older women. Nudes are not uncommon in art. There's many nudes out there. They've been done for centuries, but depicting older women, older nudes in art is very much a different situation. And I wanted to challenge that. I wanted to challenge that taboo that our society has around older women being displayed. So I hired some models. I went on a search for models first, and that was a bit of a story in itself, but I was able to hire some models and to be able to work with the full figure. So these models would come to my studio. I'd take several hundred photographs of them and then use the photographs again in multiple layers to create the image. And I often put in the layers, I would put the figure on top of a natural organic form, a flower, a leaf, a tree, something like that, in order to integrate the figure with the natural world. Next slide, Jody, please. And then I decided to turn the subject matter onto myself. So the first pivotal moment for me in working with the older figure was that moment of observing my mom's hands. And the second pivotal moment was when a really beautiful man, a former colleague and friend of 45 years, recently widowed, showed up on my doorstep, probably in the middle of the pandemic of 2020, and offered me a lifetime partnership. I immediately, well, not immediately, after a couple of months, I asked him if he would be willing to do a photo shoot with me, because I wanted to be able to express what it was that I found in our relationship. And I wanted to take that depicting of older bodies and the beauty that I saw in older bodies and extend that further to older couples. And so he of course immediately said yes. And I approached a marvelous photographer that I knew, Vince Hemmingson, and asked if we would do a photo shoot. And so on my 68th birthday, we did a photo shoot down on Wreck Beach. And I used these images for a series of paintings afterwards. Could I get the next picture, Jody, please? So this is one of the images that was done from that. It is called The Heart Longs for the Road That It Knows. And it's on display right now as part of the next festival for the Eastside Culture Ball down at the Pendulum Gallery. What I have done in both this one and in the next one is to take other images that I found to be symbolic of the relationship that I'm now in, the love that I experience, the longing, I guess, of our journey, and the just to depict the journey itself. I had done many years ago a series of silkscreen prints of the Southern Alberta landscape where I live. And I started bringing those out and using those as one of the layers for these images. Next slide, Jody, please. And on this one, so these are called the Long Road Home. And because both of us come from Southern Alberta, because both of us are in our, I guess in our 70s now, we are on a journey. We're on a journey together, and we're on a journey into older age. So the symbolism here is in the highway, it's in the road, it's in the sandhill cranes that are there, a symbol of longevity and lifelong commitment and beauty. So my mode of creation, as I said, is very introspective, and it grows even more so the older I become. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Annette. I found myself a little bit emotional when you were talking about your mother and her skin, and I really appreciate the depth of description that you provided us. We'll transition over to the second question, and we'll return to Cat to respond first. So imagining that moments of optimal synchronization of all three of these brain networks would be like a creative flow state. Can you describe an experience or moment in your creative production when you've experienced a flow state, and how did that flow state feel to you? Cat. We're both muted. Now you're muted.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah.
That flow state is something that I strive to get, but it's not, it doesn't happen all the time. It's kind of happening randomly, unexpected. But as an artist myself, I always strive to get into that flow stage. So trying to find ways to get into that moment. There is the work that I did called Fold, if you can bring that image up. So this is one of the pieces that happened in that flow stage. This is, I remember that I actually didn't even know that I was going to make this. I had no idea what I wanted to make. I was in a strict deadline. I needed to do a show and I was running out of time and I was getting very frustrated because nothing was working. And then I decided just to work and not think about it. So I was just ripping and layering and folding, and I wasn't really thinking of an image per se. I was just acting because I had no idea what I was going to do. And in that stage, the beginning, I remember, the end, I remember, but I don't remember the middle. So it's almost like you lose time. You kind of, I was reading somewhere that some artists describe it as like an out of body experience. And I would say that also to me felt like that, because you feel like something else is working with you, because you feel so not attached to your body, if that makes sense. And this is one of those paintings that the theme came out after it was done. I didn't really know what this was about. And then I think I was doing a critique, and then she was asking me questions about it. And then I realized she was getting to some very sensitive subjects for me at the time, because I wasn't ready to talk about my eating disorder. And this painting called Fold is kind of communicating what I don't want to have a conscious awareness of. So this painting is about trying to heal but not being able to heal, the attempt to sew back those damaged parts of myself in my physical body and psychologically. So the flow state for me is it's also, you also get kind of like a high out of it, like you feel above in the clouds. You feel very happy, a bliss experience when you get that moment. And every time you get the moment is a gift, because it doesn't happen all the time. I wish it did, but it's something that happens randomly. So that's how I describe the flow stage.
Thank you, Kat. I really appreciate your honesty and you sharing these personal subjects with us. We have a little bit of time for this question for you, but I guess mostly just want to respond to what you were saying. I was thinking about, I like the juxtaposition with this bliss state, this high that you describe, while in this moment for making this work, it's accompanied possibly like by at the same time a release of like hard, very more difficult experiences for you. So it's interesting that these things are happening in tandem, and then the result is this beautiful work. So I don't know if that prompts any thoughts from you, but I find that very interesting.
Yeah, for me, like that flow stage is where the subconscious has an open window, like you're not blocking it. And that's why I like that flow stage, because it's the raw part of yourself. You're not hiding and preventing things. So when you get to the flow stage, your subconscious is bringing things forward and you're not preventing it. So that's when you get really amazing work, authentic work that is the true you, because it's coming out from down here. Because sometimes we I think when I was first starting as an artist, you're working in a surface level, right? And you're not working down here. And then when you work down here, that's where the real raw work comes out. And that's what identifies your work from other artists, because it's those parts of you that can't be replicated from other artists because it's you.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's so true. We'll move over to Shary. I will pose the question. So imagining that moments of optimal synchronization of all three of these brain networks would be like a creative flow state. Can you describe an experience or moment in your creative production when you've experienced a flow state, and how did that flow state feel for you if you have?
I would echo a lot of what Cat said, actually. I also kind of lust after that flow state, and it's not something that, you know, you go into the art studio and bang, it's happening. But if I were to describe broadly what that flow state feels like, I would say that kind of like what Kat said, that I feel fully immersed in the moment, really present in that moment, and really focused on the work that I'm doing. And again, also lose that sense of space and time. And as I mentioned earlier, I often fail with a lot of the work that I'm doing as I'm practicing. But despite all of that failure, I do find that it's worth investing in when I'm in that flow state, because it's just so important to me, and it brings me so much pleasure. And I have noticed that there are certain conditions that I can create that help to create that flow state a little bit. So I find that I get into a flow state more easily when I'm by myself in my studio with my art materials around. Some people really love going into a coffee shop and sketching, and that's how they get into their flow state. But that's not really something that works for me so much. I also find that there is a relationship, kind of like what Kat was saying too, again, between the body and that flow state. And I find that a really great way to kind of prime myself for studio work is to cycle to my studio from my home, and that kind of body, igniting the body helps to create a flow state as well. And I also find that contemplative activities like hiking or dancing or meditation or whatever, those also are good tricks for me to get into that flow state. And I wanted to mention that sort of in that seeking process for the flow state, I started reading work by a psychologist from the 1960s who was teaching also into the 90s, I think, at the University of Chicago. And his name, he was Hungarian. His name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And he wrote a number of books on creativity and on flow. And so I did some reading about him, and he talks about he has identified certain characteristics of the flow state, being really concentrated on the task and really having a clarity of goals, so that, like, if I'm making a sculpture, for example, and if it's not working, I get some really clear feedback on whether it's working or not. One of the things I found really interesting about his research is that he talks about feeling in control, but only a certain amount of control over the material, so that you feel challenged. So you feel like there's something to strive for, but at the same time, it's not too easy, so that you have a certain knowledge. So for example, with encaustic, for me, I've been working with it for so long that I have some knowledge to say, okay, well, if I apply it in this way to this fabric, this is probably what's going to happen. So that familiarity with the material and the challenge sort of create a situation where I'm kind of stretched but loose, like I'm striving for something, but I have a certain familiarity and ease with it. And it's in those times that he talks about that sense of losing time and that sense of it being really intrinsically rewarding and a deep experience when we're being creative, like Kat was saying, that she has found in that process. So just some quick images. Jody, if you don't mind throwing up the first one. I have played with alcohol ink in the last couple of years and combined that painting on top of encaustic. Encaustic is molten, and when it cools, it's very smooth. So it is really an interesting material to work with alcohol ink. Jody, if you don't mind putting up the next slide, please. Excuse me. This is a painting with alcohol ink. And what I discovered in combining it with wax was that as I heated the wax, the alcohol ink would start to crack. So you can see cracks in here. You can see these kind of bursts like cells. And I really enjoyed and found that was a perfect way of finding that balance of being loose, but familiar with the material, and also not really knowing what the material was going to do. And I really found that I had to work in partnership with the material as well. And I had to let it do its thing, and I wasn't able to completely control it. And there's one more slide I have. Just sort of talking about this looseness of the material as well. So when we heat up wax, it starts to melt and mix in with the paint and mix in with the pigments in the wax. So it's a material that really helps to create that sense of flow just by the material itself.
Thank you very much, Shary. And we will move over to Annette. Annette, imagining the moments of optimal synchronization of all three of these brain networks would be like a creative flow state. Can you describe an experience or moment in your creative production when you've experienced a flow state? And how does that flow state feel to you if you've experienced it?
I experience flow in different situations and with intensities. Jody, could I have the first slide, please? I work with walnut ink on translucent drafting film. And because I work relatively representationally, I want the figure. I have to, it's very fluid because the drafting film is a very slick surface. So I have to, as Shary was talking about, I have to have some control, but I can't have too control. I can control it to a certain extent by putting clear gesso underneath it, but the walnut ink on such a slick surface also has a will of its own, and it will do what I want. And so there are moments where it just flows of its own accord, and it can be beautiful or it cannot. And when it flows wonderfully, it works really well. But the flow that is really crucial to me right now in my present work is the flow of process. What I have done in order to share my insights on aging gracefully and boldly was to invite 7 older women, all of them creatives, all of them artists in one way or another. Most of them are over the age of 65. I think our oldest artist is 83, and the youngest one is just under 60. But they're all wonderfully creative souls who I invited to come together and explore turning their artistic gaze on themselves and their own body. Jody, the next slide, please. So what I did was invite these ladies to do this nude photo shoot. I again asked Vince, the photographer, if he would come and do it. And on a sunny day in June, we went down to Wreck Beach and we had a very inspiring day. We didn't know each other before this happened, or some people knew each other, but not too much. Nobody had ever maybe there was one or two that had posed nude before, but the majority of us had not. We brought along different props to create different scenarios, Japanese lanterns, parasols, hats, all kinds of things in order to create a different look. And we're looking at ourselves and we're looking at our aging bodies, and we had a most inspiring day. And ever since then, it's been a wonderful collaboration between these women. What I did, next slide, please, Jody, was take these photographs. I went down to Toronto Island in July to residency at Artscape, and I've used these photographs and I'm turning them into a visual artwork. So I started this down there, working in my usual process. Next slide, Jody, please. And the creative choices, the decisions that we make with these neurological networks of ours sometimes tells us that maybe we're heading in the wrong direction, or maybe we need to change course, or maybe we need to expand or change. I never seem to be able to have a singular vision in my head and execute that, or execute a photograph exactly how it is. As I'm working, I'm always intuitively going, well, is this working? Isn't it working? And I don't try not to hesitate to change. The painting that I did down at Artscape, I came back to my Vancouver studio, took one look at it, and washed it all down and started again. Because what I wanted to create that day was that feeling of the flow of action, the flow of movement between these women on the beach in the sun on that beautiful day in June. So that's where I'm taking this now. It's still not finished. You can see that on the right and the left, there's multiple layers to it. I've actually sliced it up. And next slide, Jody, please. And I actually want to, because this is on translucent drafting film, it's not on a stiff surface, I wanted to take this painting that I'm working on. It's about 6 feet long, 4 feet high. And I actually want to curve it and bend it and shape it so that I get the same feeling of movement, the same feeling of flow that I felt that we had that particular day. I do want to say that I was very fortunate to receive a Canada Council grant for this project, and each of the women that were involved in the project are working on a body of artwork in their own style, in their own medium. We share these, we inspire each other, we meet once a month. We email back and forth. Some of them are writing poems. Some of them are thinking of different performance pieces that can be done. One of the ladies has begun dancing again, and she hasn't danced for many years. So it has inspired us and emboldened us. And so we call the project 8 Women Aging Boldly. Again, we want to expose our own identities. We want to look at ourselves. We want to confront our own bodies. We want to confront our own mortality with a lot of scrutiny, with a lot of grace, and with a lot of boldness.
Thank you very much, Annette. That's wonderful. All right, I'm conscious of time and we may go a little bit over. So I'm just so the audience is aware, we may pass 8 o'clock. We have one more question left, and I will turn back to Cat for this. We've explored elements of the creative force within the brain, and I'd like to expand to the broader role of the body, which many of you have already explored in this discussion so far. So I really appreciate that. So looking at kind of the somatics of the creative experience, whether in the perspective of the body as a vessel for your ideas and experiences, or say in channeling of yourself, whether in the feeling of a flow state, in execution of technical skills, physical endurance, or movements in production, or use of your body as the subject matter of your work, for examples. As an artist, how does your body play a role or influence your creative production or process? So Kat, I'll let you explore that.
Thank you. So I did touch base a little bit on that, so I can go into a little bit further. If you can put the third slide. So this is a picture of me painting in the studio. So how I mentioned before is it's so important to feel grounded on the ground. I love dancing. Back in the day, I was what do they call it, bar star in those days. And that's where I felt the physical part of my body, the tension. Also, you get the flow when you're connecting with the music, because you're not telling your body to move your right arm or move your leg. You're just listening to the music, and the music's kind of guiding. So you're kind of, your body and the music are connected. And that's the same thing that I take when I'm painting. So the music or the sounds that I choose, because I've been experimenting with different tones. So there's tuning forks that they make that sound that get you in that kind of meditative sound. So I've been experimenting with different types of sound so my body is connected to the sound and my body is moving with it in partnership. And I use that to create work. So the images that come out are intuitively come from my movement rather than me saying, I'm going to put this mark here and put this mark there. So intuitively is the beginning, the stages. And when we get to near the end, and that's when the conceptual construction happens. So I look at the painting and I try to understand the relationship between the marks. So I look at it and I said, does that look balanced? And if it doesn't, I go back and repeat the same process. And I keep repeating the same process until I find the image balanced. And it looks complete to me. Can you go to the next final painting? So this one is called Spiritual Rebirth. So this actually took me quite a long time. I think it took me over a year to do. It's 24 by 36 on canvas. And there's layers on top of layers on top of layers, because I kept having to repeat the process again, trying to get myself in that trance semi state when I'm moving around, trying to make the clouds look natural, close to natural as I can. And that's why I like working in the raw intuitive cycle, because I'm not making a cloud because it's a cloud. I'm making the fluid of the cloud, so almost looks like water, to bring the energy of the atmosphere into the painting. And I also tend to make the line straight, and that's something I brought because I grew up in Saskatchewan, so it brings comfort to me. So this is a painting rebirth, and this is the example that I bring to this conversation regarding movement. Thank you. I think I'm running out of time.
Thank you very much, Kat. For Shary, as an artist, how does your body play a role or influence your creative production or process?
Well, I wanted to be able to say that I get paint and I get water and my wax and everything just flows beautifully. But much like Annette said, things don't always go as planned. And I found this a very interesting question because I didn't realize until I thought through my answer how challenging it is to work with encaustic physically in terms of my body. If you can put the first slide on, please, Jody. So when I'm working with encaustic, I'm working with hot wax, as I said, which gets really hot in summer. Jody, are you still there? There we go. And so I'm using a torch, and also if it's in the winter, so it's hot in the summer, and in the winter, well, all year round, I have to have a lot of good ventilation. So in the winter, it's extremely cold because I have my doors open and my windows open, and I have a fan blowing the fumes out. I often wear a ventilator mask, and I have soundproof earmuffs, and I have protective gloves on. So all of this stuff is actually very restrictive, which in some ways you would think would not really help the flow state. And when I'm using a torch, I have to really be mindful and present because there's a risk of fire all the time. And heating up that wax, like I showed you with that palette, takes a long time. So it's not like, flipping open a palette of watercolors and painting briefly. It takes a long time to heat it up. So I end up working for long periods of time to make it worthwhile. So I end up standing over the work for a long time, and it's hard on the body as well. So in some ways it's very challenging. Jody, if you don't mind putting the next slide up, please. But at the same time, working with the body, if you will, of encaustic, like the physical materials, is totally seductive. It's beeswax, and it's made of damar resin as well, which hardens it and gives it this beautiful shiny sheen. It's beautiful to hold in my hands and to carve with it and mold it. It's just a very sensual material for looking at. It catches the light in beautiful ways, and it smells beautiful in the room when I'm working with it, and it has an amazing three-dimensionality. And as I said at the beginning, it kind of is somewhere between solid and molten. And I thought I would just end with a little video to show you how I work with fabric and wax. It's very mesmerizing and really helps to bring about the muse for me that Cat was talking about at the beginning, about working with material that really, and circumstances that start that flow and that sense of the muse. So I'm dipping the fabric here into the wax. So there's something about just having my hands in that material and working with it that's fires up all of those brain networks and gets that flow going. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you for that, Shary. I found that that video clip really captivating, and I don't know if you slowed it down at the beginning. I wanted to ask.
I did.
Okay.
Although, as I did say, working with the material is kind of a slow process in the sense, although at the same time, as soon as you pull it out of there, it hardens up right away, especially in the middle of winter.
It's quite a mesmerizing piece of footage. So thank you for sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
And last but not least, Annette, as an artist, how does your body play a role or influence your creative production or process? And so I'll allow you to share a little bit more. Thank you.
Jody, first slide, please. So my body is my creative process at this point in my creative career. No, wrong one. Sorry, that was the other one, the portrait, the close-up portrait.
Oh, I apologize if they're out of order. If they need to flick back and forth, just let her know.
There's nothing like, yes, it's the one where it's a really close-up of my face and hands. So there's nothing like really looking at one's own body with a very unflinching gaze, to be able to see yourself, to see the pores of your skin, to see the wrinkles, to see the age spots, to have your portrait taken with no makeup, no hair, no nothing. It's just microscopic, unflinching look at yourself. And it's a little scary. but it's also really emboldening and it's freeing and it's in its own way. And I look at this and I see my mother's hands and I realize the whole circle that where I've come to from where I've started. Could I get the next one, Jody, please? And it's the one where that's when I'm seated. I've had a lifelong hard look at my own body. I've found that most women don't like their bodies, or they don't like something about their bodies, and that's troublesome, but that's a whole other topic for discussion. One of the reasons that I had difficulty with my body was that when I was 15, I developed scoliosis, a severe curvature of the spine. I had spinal surgery where I had bones from a bone bank inserted into my spine to strengthen it, and I had to wear a body cast for a year. My back has always been crooked. I've never wanted to see it exposed in any way. I think I was in my 40s before I had a bathing suit. And so this particular portrait is exactly me and how I've hidden my body for so many years because of the deformity that I felt made it unattractive. Next slide, Jody, please. Nope, not that one, the one that was at the beginning. There's just a headshot. So this is me now at 70, all right? And I find that I'm not hiding my body anymore. I find that no matter how it has evolved, no matter how it has changed, okay, that I can stare at it, I can look at it, I can be fearless in depicting it. And to me, that's a huge shift in not only my process, but in my thinking about myself and the introspective nature of my own work. And now the one of the group of women, Jody, please. So another photo shoot from the day of the photo shoot. So I said, I think that many women have got body issues because we've always been told by society as women how we should look, what size we should be, how tall we should be, what makeup we should use, how we should hide our wrinkles, how we should dye our hair, all manner of things. And to have this fabulous group of women who are just wonderfully open about looking at themselves and looking at themselves as physical beings, as spiritual beings, as sexual beings, okay, has been a great gift. And last slide, Jody, please. So this is part of that image that I was telling you about, and I'm starting to depict my back in a manner of my own choosing. And I think it comes back full circle to the first question that we had today. Where do we get our information from? What do we observe in our lives, in nature, in the world around us, or in ourselves that we can use and to enhance our creative process? How do we make the choices that we do? And for me, it's all about looking at myself, looking at others who are like-minded souls, and being able to use those observations with empathy, with some sort of introspective response to who we are and how we inhabit our place in this world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annette. Thank you. So that concludes our question period. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you, Cat, Shary, Annette, for sharing your work and your perspectives. I really appreciated how personal you were with what inspires you, but also what your relationships as physical creatures, as humans, as women, with the world and with your work. So thank you very much for giving us insight into the decisions that you make and what you create. We invite everyone to visit Cat, Shary, and Annette at their studios November 17th to 20th for the Culture Crawl. Again, be sure to check out their profiles on the website, culturecrawl.ca, and you can see where they're located to make sure you go see them in person if you want to talk with them a little bit more or see more of their work. And just if anyone's curious, the information around the brain networks, we shared a short video between the panelists before, just to kind of jumpstart our conversation. And it was bigthink.com. So there's some different videos there, but that one was about creativity and the brain. So that one got us going. And I hope everyone will join us for tomorrow's and final talk, art and healing, which I think we dove into some of the subjects already tonight. So I'm really excited to see how the conversation will evolve tomorrow. So I hope those of you watching tonight will come and join us again tomorrow. And thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you all have a warm and wonderful evening. Thanks.
Thanks, Samantha. And thanks to Eastside Cultural Society, Eastside Art Society, sorry.